r/AskReddit. To any redditor whose wife/so had a baby that clearly wasn't yours, what's your story? This is a different twist. Have refrained from sharing this story online. Wasn't my finest moment and worried about what people behind the keyboard would say to me. But to be honest, in real life, more people than I would like already know and judge me, so really what's a bunch of strangers. A few years ago, I ended an emotional, verbal and physical abusive relationship. The week I moved my stuff out, the prick put on his nice guy persona and played with my emotions, and stupidly I slept with him, kind of as a goodbye I guess. Moved into a new house later that week and an old friend helped out. Ended up christening my brand new bed in the heat of the moment. Strong hero helping a damsel in distress and actually listening to me and being a supporter made me continue my stupid decisions. Few weeks later find out I'm pregnant. Sick as fuck with constant nausea, stressed out, felt like I'd hit rock bottom. Told them both, I'm honest like that. Old friend got hella clingy and emotional, borderline stalkerish, and spent most of our conversations crying on me and needing me to comfort him, but offered me no comfort in return. Made me pull away and distance myself. Abusive ex turned all hero, provided the support and comfort I needed. He took charge, but refused to raise a kid if it wasn't his AMD wanted to know. In my weakest, he moved me out my new refuge and back into his house, despite a threat I'd be pretty much fucked if it wasn't his. Guess I was slightly delusional and convinced myself it was his. He pampered me like never before. He put on an amazing act. He ordered a high-tech DNA test from the States that tests the baby's DNA via my blood and tests it against the man's blood sample to see if they match. Cost him nearly $2,000 and took far longer for the results than hoped. The day after my birthday we found out they weren't a match. I was already back in his hold. If I didn't do what he wanted I would be out on the streets, homeless, penniless, and pregnant. So at 13 weeks 5 days he drove me 2 hours away to the nearest abortion clinic and made sure I went in and through with it. He instantly dropped his act and became worse than he was before. He loved to rub it in my face and taunt me and use it as leverage for even more controlling abuse. The whole ordeal broke me completely, and a year later I left for good. I've struggled with what happened. I've gone through depression, anger, regret, and what ifs in a endless cycle. The pain and shame and anger will always be there, but either I'm becoming numb and used to it, or it's fading as I heal in a happier life. The real father doesn't know about the test and the whole horrible story. I know it would break him. He is more mentally fragile than I thought, and I care about him, even though we no longer are friends. So that's my story of the trashiest moment in my life. Please don't be too harsh. Not me, my fiance. His piece of shit junkie ex got pregnant, so he'd stay with her. His son does not look like him. His son has dark hair and tan olive skin. My fiance is pretty light skinned. And a lot of his features just look nothing like his either, so it's pretty clear they aren't related. She was able to pull it off for 2 years though, because he kind of looks like her. She finally fessed up when his son was 2 years old, but at that point she already wasn't taking care of him and ultimately lost custody. He has always loved him as his own despite not actually being related, and his biological dad, not his real dad, because that is 100% my fiance, has never been in his life, although I believe he lives in our town. Not sure. No one talks about it much. Fast forward to today, he's 15 and his mother is not in his life at all and never really has been, despite the fact she lives in the same town as us. My fiance and his mother, son's grandmother, have raised him completely. She just got out of prison recently for the 2nd or 3rd time in his life, this time for robbery. She said she had nothing to do with it though. Sure Jan, and reaches out via the phone, but he has no desire to see her. They just barely know each other, so I think it's awkward and painful for him. He is a huge brat and has issues, ADHD, went to an alternative school because he wasn't going to school, was on probation for weed, but just got off. But it's hard not to love and care for him because of the fact his mom is such a piece of shit. He knows my fiance isn't his biological son now, but doesn't like to talk about it. He found out because he read some texts between his mom and his grandma. I try and be the best soon-to-be stepmom I can be and guide him to making good decisions. He shows interest in college and I really hope he becomes the best man he can be despite some shitty circumstances. I'm pregnant with my first child, a son, so I hope he'll be a good big brother too. Not but I have an uncle who has been teased his whole life for the way he looks and has struggled to get a girlfriend. This caused him to feel depressed at times, but he still knuckled down and works hard and now owns a landscaping business and makes good money. About a year ago he brings this girl to our family event, introducing her as his girlfriend, and spends the night telling everyone how in love they are. She is gorgeous, so everyone is impressed and happy he found love, but a lot of people start to comment that she seems to be uninterested in him, but we chalk it up to her being shy around the big family. They very quickly move in together and she very quickly gets used to spending his money. We start to suspect she's in it for the money, but he won't listen to that, so no one knows what to do. About 2 months into their relationship she says she's pregnant. We're all happy for him as he always wanted to be a father. About 6 months into the pregnancy his sister, who works at a hotel, says she saw her there with some black guy she didn't recognize. Again my uncle refuses to believe that. We figure maybe she saw someone who looked similar and stopped pressing it. A month ago she has their son. She is white with blonde brown hair. He is mixed race, so very light brown skin with medium brown hair. They both have blue eyes. The son is very dark skinned with black hair and brown eyes. But he still says we are bullying his GF and that if we can't to get out of his life. Many family members have begged to get a DNA test, but he refuses and is insulted to be asked. What can you do, man? Edit. I said it was genetically impossible for their kid to have brown eyes. That made people very upset. Sorry guys. Sorta opposite. My mother married her high school sweetheart and they were awful together. It was physically and emotionally abusive, and they really shouldn't have been together, but young, dumb and hormonal I guess. As that's falling apart, my mother leaves and cheats on her husband with this other guy for 2 or 3 months, may or may not have been hiding a cocaine addiction, and was pregnant. It was pretty clear to most people in the know that the child would be from the new guy, not the husband. Timing, etc. You learned about reproduction. Being that things were already in a nosedive, it just got worse. They fought constantly, and once my brother was born it was tripled. The family was so sure that the new guy was the father, but the baby looked so much like the husband that he was convinced that this was his child. He treated to take his son and run away, and she would tie my brother to her leg at night to make sure she'd wake if he tried. When she filed for divorce, a paternity test was done and confirmed that he wasn't the father, but the new guy was. The judge deemed, rightfully, that he had no authority over this kid and he's an ex-husband now. Divorce was finalized. Mother eventually lived with a new guy for some years. They eventually broke up, and due to other reasons, the new guy passed away when I was about 11 years old. He was good at being a fun dad. It's not over, though. Since my brother was born, while my mother was still married, he'd had this guy's name. Apparently it was deemed unnecessary to change it at the time. Laziness, drug addiction, I don't know. It was in my brother's late teens that he started the process to changing his last name to match our mother's maiden name. This apparently stirred up some emotion, and my mother felt that, after some decades, maybe he chilled out. She had many life changes, gone through rehab for her coke problem, changed where she lived, gone back to school. Let's call the ex and say hi, make amends and junk. This lead down a long road. My brother hasn't always been the sharpest. I won't lie, there was plenty of unfair teasing over stupid things said, but I don't know that I'd seen anyone use it against him. They started hanging out. My brother and mother were close, so when the option arose for the ex-husband to see what that baby looked like now, of course they all went and had lunch. My brother then started talking with the ex one-on-one, not just through our mother. They would go out together, and my brother met some of the ex-husband's family, got a kinda shitty tattoo from one of them even. The ex started putting this doubt in my brother's mind about who he was and who he was related to, who his father was. Since our father died years before, long story, new guy wasn't even my father, but not trying to write a novel yet, and an uncle passed not long after. My brother wanted a dad, an uncle, a grandpa, someone. So he started to doubt Eventually he confessed that he wasn't sure who to believe, and we went and found the old paternity tests and wrote a letter with the help of a lawyer to the ex-husband to knock it off. He was clearly trying to take advantage of my brother, whether he himself believed that it was his kid or what, I don't know. TL. Doctor, mother divorces high school sweetheart after paternity test shows my brother isn't his kid. He returns decades later and tries to get my brother to believe that he's the dad, despite paternity tests. I have no clue if the man I have been calling dad is my birth father. My dad denied me and my oldest sister. 6 years before I was born, my dad had a child with some lowlife. He didn't acknowledge my sister until she was 2, finally getting a paternity test. She is his. My dad also had another child when my oldest sister was 2. He didn't deny her. I was born 4 years later and he denied I was his, but stayed with my mother until I was 2. I still visited him on weekends and they went to court for split custody. All my life I heard that my dad believed I was my mother's best friend's child. It didn't help when the man's sister spread it around town that I was also her brother's kid. Anyway, one day I joked with my mom and I said, I'll get a paternity test to prove it. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, no, seriously don't. So I actually have no clue, but I had suspicion. BTW, my dad, ginger, green eyes, pale. My mom, brown hair, olive skin, hazel eyes. Me, brown hair, olive skin, hazel eyes. Suspected affair, brown hair, brown eyes, fair skin. So IDK whose child I am, since I look just like my mom. The man who was my great-grandmother's husband was infertile, but didn't want anyone to know, so he encouraged my great-grandmother to sleep around. Eventually this resulted in 3 daughters, all with different fathers. This was in northern Finland in the 30s. My grandmother was the middle daughter. According to all reports, my great-grandmother's husband was an asshole, and my bio great-grandfather was reportedly the love of her life, but they didn't reconnect for decades until they both ended up in the same retirement home. My aunt has an adorable picture of them getting married in their wheelchairs at the age of 79 and 81 respectively. Continuing the tradition, my grandmother, who was very mentally unstable and just likely cheated on my grandfather and conceived a son. We found pictures of her bathing topless at a nearby vacation destination, with the caption, place name, I got pregnant on the back in her handwriting. My grandfather still wanted to raise the child, but she freaked out on him and disappeared for months. He later learned that she had fled halfway across the province and hidden in a home for unwed mothers and gave the boy up for adoption. My mom searched for her brother for years, but wasn't able to find him before she died. I kinda hope he'll pop up on 23andMe, so my aunt will have a sibling again. If you know any man who was born in Burnaby, British Columbia in 1958 and adopted into a Dutch-Canadian family, that might be my half-uncle. I'm now in my 50s. Back in my 20s, I was really desperate and dated a woman who was about 12 years older. About 9 months into our relationship, I go away to another state for a weekend trip. Come back and found out that she had given birth to a child. I was perplexed because she didn't seem pregnant and no one around us knew she was pregnant. She even said that she didn't know that she was pregnant. I'm black, the woman was white and the kid was powder white. But I do have white in my family. I didn't believe the kid was mine because 1. I would have had to impregnate her in the first month. Possible, but I don't remember ejaculating. 2. She looks nothing like me, and 3. She's too light to have my genes. My mom convinces me that this has to be my kid because the woman says it is and that I have mixed background. I want to believe it because not believing it means some other guy is the dad. But my rational side says there is no way she's mine. So we move in and eventually get married. The relationship doesn't last and we separate. I decide that I have to find out the truth, even though I know it. I get some money together and get a DNA test. Sure enough, I'm 99% excluded. I show the results to the mother and she says I'm wrong and the test is wrong, and that I just don't want to be a dad. I tell her that I do, but I'm done paying child support. However, I give her the option to pay for another DNA test or go through the courts. She declined. No, my baby, but my brother's. When I was around 16, my older brother 24, was having his second child with his longtime girlfriend. One day after school I go over to their house to hang out with them, and a guy I went to school with who was friends with my brother and the girl starts going into labor, so everyone helps loads her into the cab of his truck and speed off to the hospital. I lived in rural Oklahoma at the time, so the hospital, where babies are born, is a little over an hour away. Now I'm in the bed of the truck along with the friend speeding down this 2-lane highway to get this girl to the hospital before the baby comes out. Well, we make it on time and they take her back into the delivery room to have the baby. A few hours pass and my dad, mom and 3 other siblings show up along with my grandmother. We wait around, and about 6 hours after arriving the baby pops out. So when we were given the all clear we all rushed in to see the baby. The mother is laying on the bed beaming saying she loves my brother, and she is so glad that they had another little boy etc etc. Well, the nurse walks in pushing the baby in his little crib and bam, it hits all of us. The baby is half black, and we recognize who the dad is, the friend who is there with us standing in the room with this look on his face. My entire family along with my brother walk out of the hospital and just leaves the mom and friend there together at the hospital. Apparently while my brother was locked up in county jail the friend offered the woman sex for some meth, and had been doing it for a while. The guy never did step up and take care of the little boy. My brother eventually got sent to prison for drug related offenses and my parents took in the 2 boys for a long time and made the mother jump through the CPS hoops to get them back. Now she is a ranking member of the Oklahoma Department of Corrections in a fairly large prison. That was about 9 years ago, and I haven't seen them in about 7. But I also do not live in Oklahoma anymore. I miss them kids. I dated a girl for some time. When my ex came back around I thought we're in the back together, so I broke it off with the girl I had been dating. Well, needless to say I never got back with my ex. Let me also mention, at this time I'm a single parent who had raised a well-adjusted daughter for 14 years and had my own company and doing fairly well for myself. Back to the story. One day I get a call from the girl I had been dating for some time, and she tells me she wants to meet at a local coffee shop to have some coffee. Very evasive, doesn't tell me why. So, I meet up with her, and she breaks out all these pictures of a little boy who's about 4 or 5 years old, and tells me that this is my child. So, we decide to go next door to the local pub and have a few drinks. One thing leads to another, and she's trying to get me to have sex with her again. I forgot to mention that she is engaged at this time. So, we ride around and talk the whole time she's trying to get me to find some place that we can go fool around, and I'm just not in the mood. Since I just found out I probably have a son and I have a lot on my mind. It's not her booty. So, I decide to take her back to her car, but she's too drunk to drive, so I take her to her mom's, and as she gets out of my truck she realizes she's lost her engagement ring, which she took off at some point in time in the night. And we part ways with me telling her we need to get DNA test. So, few weeks go by, she's introduced me to her son. We go out a few times as a mini family, and then comes time for the DNA test. It comes back as 99.9% I'm not the father. She tells me it has to be wrong, and she lines pay for another DNA test. So, we go have another DNA test, and as you can imagine the results came back the same. That's what she breaks down to tell me that she had sex with some loser guy she knew in high school the night I broke up with her, because no one had ever broke up with her before. It's been about 15 or 16 years now, and about 3 months ago I get FBDM. Hey, I'm getting divorced, we should get together. I'll pass. I almost was at this point in my life. This story is one of the oddest things to happen to me while dating. I had exchanged messages with this one girl on a dating site who I then later added to social media. We'd flirt casually, but it didn't get further than that. No dates, no nothing. She and I were both East Indian. She made good money as a nurse, but still lived at home with her parents. She would date on the sly though. She messaged me after a few months of limited conversations, saying we should totally hang out. I was working until 10 that night, so told her I would get home by 10:30 and needed to change and freshen up, so I would be free at 11 PM. She still wanted to hang out. When we met up she drives me to this parking lot by a park, 20 minutes away from my place. She was overly flirty. a few hugs by her, compliments by her, huge smiles and kisses. She even asked me to smell her neck as she sprayed different perfumes on each side of herself. I'll never forget this. When I got in close to smell each side of her neck, she flashed me her breasts, asking me if I liked what I see. TF. She suggests we go somewhere outside. I'm a grown-ass man who has an apartment, so I told her we could just go back to my place and take it from there. She agreed, but said she wanted to take me to this park. It's almost midnight, and takes me by the hand to a super secluded bench in the park. She's all over me, and I legit pick her up in my arms and tell her I'll bring her back to my place. I put her down by her car and her smiles turn to tears. She tells me I was one of the nicest guys she knows and was sorry. She was going to trap me. She spoke about how I had pictures with babies and my younger cousins all on my FB and knew I would take care of my kid. She had missed her period and confirmed she was pregnant from her doctor. She wanted to have sex with me and tell me I was the dad. Said her parents would disown her due to the pregnancy. The guy she was fucking had ghosted her. I didn't say anything, but sat her in the passenger seat of her car and went to drive myself home. About 10 minutes of her wiping tears, I asked her why she didn't just come over to my place. She tells me that is where her and the baby's dad would meet up to fuck in the darkness. Because we are both brown guys, it would be easier for her. My great-great-grandfather was a tall, lanky fellow with a long face. An absolute Gumby of a person. He was of British descent, with somewhat dark coloring, and very distinctive features. My great-grandmother was blatantly, blazingly Irish. Pale as heck and completely blanketed in freckles, with a mischievous, dainty little nose, and reaching a grand height of 5'3". Irish appearance isn't exactly a smoking gun, of course. Maybe great-great-grandpa had Irish heritage, or maybe she was British, but just had a whole lot of freckles. But none of that odd-looking fellow's odd-looking features appeared. My great-grandmother's little sister was also tiny, not covered in freckles, not as mischievous looking, but she also had none of her father's features. Well, there's a good reason. Neither child was his, and he knew that, and was totally okay with that, extremely happy about it, actually. See, my great-great-grandpa was injured fighting in WWI. His leg was blown apart. He nearly died, was left for dead, in fact, until a conscientious medic held a mirror up and saw it barely fog with breath, and apparently that injury also rendered him infertile. He came home to Canada, and a few years later he met a woman, a tiny, rough-edged, wild child of a farm girl, a cook on a ranch, with a shamelessly filthy mouth, and a shameful, for rural Canada in the 1920s, story. She was unmarried, with a 2-year-old daughter, so she'd given birth to after a fling with an Irishman. So giant, serene great-great-grandpa married the 4 minutes and 10 seconds firecracker and adopted my great-grandmother as his own, and loved her immensely. A few years later, I guess they decided they wanted another child. IVF wasn't exactly an option in that time and place, so, apparently, they asked a neighbor to offer his services. And great-great-grandma had another baby girl, and he adopted that baby as his own, and loved her immensely. A fantastic arrangement. Practical, and resulting in joy. He was a truly wonderful father, and his children adored him. Our side of the family still haven't told the other sister's side of the family. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe the channel.